the blonde who couldn't be saved by fame. Her grandmother tried to smother her with a pillow when she was a year old. Her mother went insane and spent her life in mental hospitals. She was humiliated, exploited, and molested in foster families. At 16, she married a neighbor to avoid returning to the orphanage. At 23, she posed nude for $50, otherwise she couldn't afford the rent. At 27, she became the most desirable woman on the planet. Frank Sinatra, Marlon Brando, President Kennedy and his brother. Everyone wanted her. 3 marriages, 3 pregnancies, pills every night. At 36, she was found dead with a telephone receiver in her hand. The girl no one wanted. On June 1, 1926, a baby girl was born in a California maternity hospital. Gladys Baker's mother worked as a film editor at a film studio and barely made ends meet. She listed her ex-husband's last name, Mortensen, on the birth certificate, even though she hadn't lived with him for a long time. Gladys named the baby Norma. The real father was her boss, Charles Gifford, a married man. When Gladys announced her pregnancy, he simply disappeared. In 2022, genetic testing would confirm that Gifford was indeed Norma's father. Gladys already had 2 children from her first marriage, but her ex-husband took them to another state and wouldn't let her see them. Now she's dealing with a 3rd child, a mental illness she doesn't yet know about, and no money. The baby, Norma, was given to the Bolenders, a pious and strict couple who raised other people's children on government welfare. Her mother visited her daughter on weekends, paid for her upkeep, and dreamed of one day taking her home. When Norma was 1 year old, something terrible happened. The girl's grandmother, Della, broke into the Bolender house in the middle of the night and tried to smother her granddaughter with a pillow. Her guardians managed to stop her and called the police. She was taken to a psychiatric hospital with a diagnosis of manic depressive psychosis. She spent 19 days there and died in agony. Marilyn later said she could immediately recognize the orphan in any room, by their empty eyes. Happiness for a few months. In 1933, Gladys made her decision. She took out a loan, bought a small house in Hollywood, and took her 7-year-old daughter in with her. They lived with a couple named the Atkinsons, who were roommates. Gladys bought Norma a dog and a beautiful piano. For the first time in her life, the girl was truly happy. She had her own home, her own room, and her mother was with her every day. The happiness lasted for several months. In January 1934, Gladys woke up screaming hysterically. She was convulsing, hallucinating, and didn't recognize the people around her. Doctors took her to a psychiatric hospital. The diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia. Gladys would never return to normal life, spending the rest of her life between hospital stays and short periods of remission. Norma again found herself abandoned. Grace Goddard, a friend of her mother's, became her guardian, but there was no money to support her. The girl continued to live with the Atkinson family. Marilyn later recalled that perhaps it was then that something happened to her that she had been unable to speak about out loud her entire life. She began to stutter, withdraw, and fear being touched. At home, where she was not expected. In the fall of 1935, Grace couldn't take it anymore and placed Norma in an orphanage. 2 years later, Grace secured guardianship and took the girl back. But Norma didn't stay home for long. Grace's husband began to sexually assault the 10-year-old. Grace sent her off to friends again, then to others, then to still others. Between the ages of 7 and 16, Norma moved through 11 foster families and several orphanages. She was tolerated for the sake of state benefits and used as an unpaid servant. In some homes, she was molested by adult men. She retreated deeper and deeper into herself, but found refuge in movie theaters. Years later, Marilyn said, "I wanted to be an actress at the age of 5. The world around me was gray and scary. In the movies, I could be anyone but myself. My adoptive parents often sent me to the cinema to get rid of me. I spent whole days there." Married at 16. In 1942, Grace's husband got a job in another state, and the family prepared to move. State laws prohibited taking a minor under guardianship outside the state. 16-year-old Norma was once again facing institutionalization, the prospect she dreaded most. Grace found a way out. Her neighbor, James Doherty, a 21-year-old aircraft factory worker, agreed to marry her. The wedding took place on June 19, 1942. Norma didn't love her fiancé and had no feelings for him. She later said she was bored to death in the marriage, but she had no choice. A year later, James enlisted in the Merchant Marine. He was assigned to Santa Catalina Island, where Norma also moved. They lived together. In April 1944, James was sent overseas to serve in the Pacific War Zone. Norma returned to California and got a job at the Radio Plane Company, a munitions factory. She built radio-controlled airplanes for the Army along with other women. Photographer at the factory. In 1945, war photographer David Conover came to the plant to shoot posters to support the soldiers. He saw a tall, chestnut-haired girl on the assembly line and asked her to pose. Norma agreed. The photographs were published. Some of them landed at the Blue Book Photo Agency, which led to Norma being invited to an interview in June 1945 at the Ambassador Hotel. At the end of July 1945, Norma quit her job at the factory and began posing regularly for various photographers. Her husband and his parents were categorically against it, but she didn't listen. In August, she signed a contract with the Blue Book Modeling Agency. There, they told her to dye her hair platinum blonde and straighten her curly hair. By early 1946, her photographs had appeared on the covers of 33 magazines, and Marilyn was invited to work at 20th Century Fox. The marriage effectively fell apart. James was categorically opposed to his wife's modeling career, and 20th Century Fox required aspiring actresses to be unmarried. In May 1946, Norma filed for divorce. On September 13, 1946, their marriage was officially dissolved in Las Vegas. Norma dies. Marilyn is born. In June 1946, Norma was invited to audition for a screen test at 20th Century Fox. Executive Ben Lyon watched the audition and offered her a standard 6-month contract. But there was one condition. She needed a stage name. Together with Lyon, they came up with the name Marilyn, after the 1930s Broadway star Marilyn Miller. She took the surname Monroe, her mother's maiden name. Norma Jean Mortensen ceased to exist. Marilyn Monroe was born. Her first roles were tiny, 2 seconds on screen, 1 line. After a year, 20th Century Fox refused to renew her contract. Then came a contract with Columbia Pictures. 1 musical, Girls of the Chorus. Her first starring role, she played the title character, Peggy Martin. Columbia also dropped her in October 1948. The money ran out. Marilyn couldn't pay her rent, $50. In 1949, Marilyn approached photographer Tom Kelly. He photographed nude women for calendars and offered $50 for the shoot. Marilyn needed the money for an apartment, so she agreed. She signed her name as Mona Monroe and stripped naked in front of the camera. These photos would return to her 3 years later and nearly ruin her career. But for now, it was just $50 that kept her from ending up on the street. Hollywood protege. In the late 1940s, a simple system worked in Hollywood. A young, beautiful woman wanted to get into the movies. An influential man could help her. In exchange, he would receive intimacy. Everyone knew about it, but no one called a spade a spade. Marilyn had Joseph Schenck, a Russian immigrant and influential producer in his 70s, who helped her secure another contract. Then came Johnny Hyde, a 50-something vice president of a major talent agency. He was madly in love with Marilyn and cast her in 2 major films. The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve were released in 1950. Marilyn played minor roles, but she was finally noticed. 20th Century Fox signed her to a 7-year contract. $500 a week was good money for an aspiring actress. Calendar scandal. By 1952, Marilyn was already quite a famous actress. She had starred in several notable roles and received good reviews. Then, calendars featuring a nude blonde against a red background began appearing in barbershops and garages across America. Many recognized her as Marilyn Monroe. The studio brass was furious. They demanded that Marilyn publicly declare that it wasn't me in the photo. But she did the opposite. Marilyn gave an interview to United Press correspondent Aline Mosby and confessed, "Yes, it was me. A few years ago I was broke. I posed nude to pay the rent. The whole country was talking about the scandal. Never before had a famous actress admitted such a thing publicly." Marilyn intuitively understood that nude photos would only fuel interest in her. She knew how to play to the public, and remembered a similar experience with an actress who had shown before her, Betty Brosmer. The following films were box office bombs. Niagara, How to Marry a Millionaire, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes were all released in 1953. Marilyn became a superstar and America's leading sex symbol. That same year, the first issue of Playboy magazine was published. Marilyn Monroe was on the cover. Inside was that very same $50 photo shoot. 18,000 versus 200. In the film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Marilyn starred alongside actress Jane Russell. Jane was paid $200,000 for her work. Marilyn was paid $18,000. The actress herself was outraged by this fact, declaring, "Look, the film is called Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and I'm a blonde." Marilyn was still under a 7-year contract, under which she received this money. 36 weeks times $500 equals $18,000. Marilyn rehearsed every scene fanatically. After filming, she continued to work with a choreographer and vocal coach. She perfected every move, every note. Her films earned the studio millions, but a contract is a contract. The studio refused to renegotiate the terms. Marilyn was difficult to work with. She was constantly late, did multiple takes, and brought her acting coach to the set to give her directions. The directors tolerated this only because audiences flocked to the theaters. Baseball legend. In 1954, Marilyn dated Joe DiMaggio, a retired American baseball legend. In the USSR, he was known primarily as Monroe's second husband. But in America in the early 1950s, DiMaggio was no less famous than Marilyn herself. They got married and flew to Japan for their honeymoon. At that moment, Marilyn was supposed to be filming a new movie with Frank Sinatra. But she flew to the other side of the planet and ignored all the studio's calls. When their plane landed at Tokyo Airport, thousands of Japanese fans were waiting for Marilyn. Police struggled to contain the aggressive crowd. Then Marilyn flew to Korea, where she performed for American soldiers at a military base. It was very cold, and the soldiers were wearing warm jackets and hats. But Marilyn appeared in a revealing dress. "That's exactly how the soldiers want to see me," she explained. Joe DiMaggio refused to go with her and remained in Japan, which was one of the reasons for their subsequent divorce. Joe hoped that after the wedding his wife would give up her career and take care of the home. For Marilyn, this was absolutely impossible. The public attention was like a drug to her. The arguments escalated. The marriage lasted less than a year. They married on January 14, 1954, and Marilyn filed for divorce in October 1954. White dress over a subway grate. In 1955, the film The 7-Year Itch was released. It tells the story of a middle-aged man obsessed with fantasies about his attractive neighbor. The scene with her white dress billowing over a subway vent has become one of the most recognizable in cinema history. Marilyn finally succeeded in renegotiating her contract. Now her salary matched her star status. But most importantly, she gained creative freedom. She could choose projects and approve directors. She moved to New York and joined the Lee Strasberg Acting Studio, where she studied the Stanislavski method, the art of transforming characters through profound emotional experiences. Marilyn also founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. This proved that despite her on-screen image as a frivolous blonde, in real life she was an intelligent and businesslike woman. Arthur Miller and 2 Losses in New York. Marilyn began an affair with playwright Arthur Miller, a renowned writer and recognized intellectual of his time. They married a year and a half later. Miller was the complete opposite of DiMaggio. Serious, educated, and far removed from the world of show business. Marilyn began seeing a therapist who identified her core issues: low self-esteem, a constant need for approval from others, a fear of being unwanted, and an inability to commit to long-term relationships. All of this stood in stark contrast to the confident, sexy star she portrayed on screen. From 1956 to 1958, things were particularly difficult. Marilyn became pregnant twice. The first pregnancy was ectopic, requiring emergency surgery. A year later, she miscarried. Despite these tragedies, she quickly returned to work. Her problems with pills and alcohol intensified. At times, Marilyn couldn't even utter a simple phrase on set. 47 takes. In 1959, Marilyn's biggest hit, the comedy Some Like It Hot, directed by Billy Wilder, was released. It tells the story of 2 musicians who disguise themselves as women to play in an all-female jazz orchestra. Filming wasn't easy, Marilyn demanding that all the other actresses in the scene have darker hair than hers. Director Wilder later told reporters that it once took Marilyn 47 takes to get the simple phrase, "It's me, sugar," right. But the film was a colossal success. Many critics still consider it the best comedy in cinema history. Marilyn won a Golden Globe for the role. It was the absolute peak of her career. From there, it was only a decline. The president and his brother. In addition to her 3 official marriages, Marilyn had affairs with some of the most famous men of the era: Frank Sinatra, Marlon Brando, Yves Montand. In this context, an affair with President John F. Kennedy doesn't seem out of the ordinary. Kennedy had a well-established reputation as a playboy. Rumors of the president's numerous affairs constantly circulated in Washington's elite circles. Most of Marilyn's biographers today are certain that in 1961-1962, she indeed had an affair. First with John Kennedy, and then with his brother Robert. There's virtually no documentary evidence. No photographs exist. But the early 1960s were a completely different time. Respectable magazines didn't publish scandalous photos of the country's top officials. Unspoken ethical rules of journalism prohibited reporting on the president's interests. In May 1962, a major event dedicated to John Kennedy's birthday took place. Marilyn interrupted filming in Los Angeles and flew to New York for a single performance. She sang, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," with such passion that the entire country realized there was definitely something going on between them. After that evening, the Kennedy brothers began distancing themselves from Marilyn. Rumor has it that the president's wife, Jackie, insisted on this. This was a severe blow to Marilyn. 3-6. In 1960 and 1961, Marilyn's last 2 films were released: the comedy Let's Make Love and the drama The Misfits. Both films flopped at the box office and received negative reviews. Talk of the end of the Marilyn Monroe era began. She was 35 years old. The naive, childlike expression that had endeared her to millions of viewers was a thing of the past. Maintaining her status as America's leading sex symbol was becoming increasingly difficult. Pills and alcohol. Marilyn regularly ended up in the hospital straight from the set. In 1961, she divorced Arthur Miller. Her 3rd marriage ended in disaster. In her final years, Marilyn was afraid to say her age out loud. She'd say it separately, 3-6, as if the full number were a curse. Shortly after Kennedy's birthday, she was fired from the film Something's Gotta Give. She constantly missed work and was unable to go on set. Fatal night. On August 5, 1962, 3 months after performing for the president, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom. At 2 a.m., the housekeeper left the guest house and noticed the light on in Marilyn's bedroom. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She called the actress's therapist. He arrived, broke a window, and found Marilyn dead. She was clutching the telephone receiver. The police weren't called until 4 a.m. What happened in the house during the next few hours remains unknown to this day. That same morning, FBI agents went to the local telephone company office and seized all of Marilyn's call records from that night. The current location of these records is unknown. Who she called before her death remains a mystery. The president's brother, Robert Kennedy, officially spent the entire day of August 4th in San Francisco, but several witnesses claim to have seen him in Los Angeles that very day. Why would he lie about his whereabouts? There was a theory that the Secret Services and the Kennedy brothers were behind Marilyn's death. The investigation was reopened in the 1980s. No evidence of murder was found. Both Kennedy brothers were assassinated within a few years of Marilyn's death. John was shot in 1963, Robert in 1968. This only added to the mystique of the whole story. Suicide. Most of Marilyn's biographers lean towards suicide. Her family included many people with severe mental illnesses. Her grandmother attempted to strangle her as an infant. Her mother spent most of her life in psychiatric hospitals, diagnosed with schizophrenia. Marilyn herself was a shy, lonely girl, abandoned by everyone closest to her. She spent her entire life desperately searching for love, approval, and attention. She failed to create a normal family, bear, and raise children. By the age of 36, she was acutely aware that she was losing the looks that had brought her worldwide fame. The world was rapidly changing around her. The 60s were approaching. The new era needed new heroes and new symbols. However, more than 60 years after her death, it can be said with certainty, the legendary blonde was much more than just a beautiful actress. The history of world cinema has seen many stars, but only one Marilyn Monroe.